The chamber was so large that clouds formed near its ceiling. Victor Hale stood at the lowest point of the Galactic Council's Judgment Hall, surrounded by 17 kilometers of crystalline walls that rose higher than mountains. Above him, arranged in circular tiers that seemed to stretch into infinity, sat representatives from over 400 alien species. Some were made of light. Others were living stone. A few existed as swirling gas clouds contained in magnetic fields. And every single one of them was staring at the small human in the gray mechanic's jumpsuit. Victor was 49 years old. He had grease under his fingernails that would not wash out, no matter how hard he scrubbed. His boots were scuffed from decades of crawling through engine housings on mining stations nobody had ever heard of. The translation device behind his ear buzzed constantly as hundreds of alien languages were converted into words he could understand. Most of those words were not kind. "This is their expert?" Someone hissed from the upper galleries. "A primitive. A child species barely 2 centuries into space travel. The audacity of sending this creature to answer for their failures." High Chancellor Morvik uncoiled from his throne at the chamber's pinnacle. He was ancient beyond human comprehension, a being whose species had mastered faster-than-light travel when Earth was still a ball of molten rock. His skin shifted colors as he moved, communicating emotions that humans had no names for. "Human designate Victor Hall." Morvik's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. "You stand accused of catastrophic negligence." The merchant vessel Infinite Horizon suffered complete warp drive failure in the Tau Ceti corridor. 12,000 Volusian traders were stranded for 19 standard rotations. Their cargo spoiled. Their contracts collapsed. The economic damage has been calculated at 4.2 trillion galactic credits. Victor scratched his chin. "That's a lot of money." The chamber went silent. Ambassador Theska of the Volusian Mercantile Confederacy rose from her seat, her insectoid features clicking with rage. "A lot of money? Human, my people have filed a formal complaint against your entire species. We demand compensation. We demand punishment. We demand that Earth be stripped of its provisional trading license and returned to quarantine status." "Ma'am, with respect, you have the story wrong." The murmuring that followed sounded like a storm approaching. "Wrong?" Morvik's colors shifted to angry red. "We have sensor recordings, maintenance logs. Your genetic signature was found on every modified component in the Infinite Horizons engineering section. You were the last being to touch that drive before it failed. I'm not saying I didn't touch it. I'm saying you don't understand what I found when I did." Victor pulled a battered tablet from his pocket. The device looked ancient compared to the holographic systems surrounding him. Its screen cracked and its casing held together with electrical tape. He tapped it once, and a 3-dimensional projection flickered to life. Above the chamber floor, it showed the internal structure of a Volusian warp drive. "When your people hired my company to do routine maintenance, they sent me because I was cheap. Human labor costs about 1/10 what Volusian engineers charge. They figured I'd clean some filters, run some diagnostics, and sign off on the paperwork. Nobody expected me to actually look at how the drive worked." He zoomed in on a specific component. "But I did look, and I found something interesting. This part here, the harmonic stabilizer, was running almost 7% out of phase. According to your own engineering specifications, anything above 5% should trigger an automatic shutdown. But the safety system had been disabled." Ambassador Theska's clicking grew louder. "Impossible. Volusian engineering is perfect. It has remained unchanged for 15,000 years because it requires no improvement. Unchanged, yes. Perfect, no. Someone turned off the safeties because the warning alarms were annoying, probably centuries ago, and because nobody ever looked at the actual systems. Nobody noticed that the drive was slowly tearing itself apart. Victor manipulated the projection, showing stress fractures spreading through the engine components like cracks in ice. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't shut down that drive manually, the Infinite Horizon would have tried to enter warp with a compromised containment field. You wouldn't have had stranded merchants, Ambassador. You would have had 12,000 people scattered across 6 dimensions of subspace. No bodies to recover. No explanation for what happened. Just a ship that vanished and never came back. The chamber's murmuring shifted tone. Several delegates leaned forward with sudden interest. You claim you saved those lives, Morvick said slowly. I claim I prevented a disaster. Whether that counts as saving lives depends on how you want to calculate it. And yet, you also claim that Volusian engineering, which has served this galaxy for 15 millennia, is fundamentally flawed. Not flawed. Chancellor. Forgotten. There's a difference. Victor tapped his tablet again, and the projection expanded to show 17 different warp drive designs from species across the galaxy. Volusian, Kathrani, Methylan, even the Council's own diplomatic vessels. I've spent the last 3 weeks in custody, which gave me a lot of time to study your technical databases. Every single one of these drives operates on the same basic principle. You generate enough power to punch a hole in subspace. You fall through, you come out somewhere else. Brute force. It works. But it's inefficient. Inefficient? A Kathrani delegate's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. Human, we have optimized these systems for longer than your planet has had multicellular life. You've optimized within a framework that was established before anyone remembers. But what if the framework itself is the problem? Victor pulled up a new schematic, one that made several engineering delegates gasp. The harmonic stabilizers in every drive I've seen are set to fixed frequencies, safe, predictable, but they're also limiting. If you modulate the harmonics in specific patterns, you don't punch through subspace. You resonate with it, and subspace responds. High Chancellor Morvick's colors cycled through shades that had no human equivalent. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that while I was stuck on the Infinite Horizon waiting for rescue, I didn't just shut down the drive. I rebuilt it. Used the ship's fabrication systems to create new stabilizers based on my calculations. And when I tested the modifications, that ship traveled from Tau Ceti to the Andromeda Relay in 9 hours. The silence that followed was absolute. 9 hours. A journey that should have taken 16 standard days. You expect us to believe, Ambassador Theska said, her voice barely a whisper, that you, a primitive, achieved what our greatest minds have failed to accomplish for thousands of years? I expect you to test it. The Infinite Horizon is still in dock. Run your own analysis. Verify everything I've told you. I'm just a mechanic, Ambassador. I don't make claims I can't back up. Morvick descended from his throne, his massive form flowing down through the tiers until he stood before Victor. Up close, the Chancellor was terrifying, a being of such age and power that his mere presence made Victor's translation device crackle with interference. Human, if what you say is true, you have just made every ship in this galaxy obsolete. You have disrupted trade routes, military strategies, and political alliances that have existed since before your species learned to use fire. Do you understand the implications? Victor met the ancient being's gaze without flinching. I understand perfectly, Chancellor. That's why I didn't just modify one drive. Morvick went very still. I had 18 hours alone in that engineering bay before your rescue ships arrived. Plenty of time to build backup copies of my work. One set of schematics is hidden in a data cache somewhere in the outer territories. Another is embedded in what looks like mining debris, currently drifting toward Earth on a trajectory that'll take about 4 months. Victor smiled. I'm not here to be judged, Chancellor. I'm here to negotiate, and my first demand is a seat for humanity on this council. The chamber erupted. The eruption lasted for 3 hours. Delegates screamed accusations across the chamber. Ambassador Theska demanded Victor's immediate execution. The Kethrani representatives called for calm while secretly calculating the commercial implications of his technology. The Methelans, silicon-based beings who process decisions over geological timeframes, simply observed and recorded through it all. Victor Heil sat on a bench designed for creatures twice his size and waited. High Chancellor Morvik eventually restored order by releasing a subsonic pulse that made every organic being in the chamber temporarily forget how to speak. When voices returned, they were quieter. Human designate Victor Hall, Morvik said. You have essentially threatened the entire galactic order with blackmail. The Council does not negotiate under duress. Then don't call it negotiation. Call it an opportunity. Victor stood, stretching muscles cramped from hours of sitting. For 200 years, humanity has been the galaxy's afterthought. We were discovered, cataloged, given a provisional trading license, and shoved into a corner of space nobody else wanted. Our ships are 30 years behind everyone else's. Our colonies are restricted to systems that elder species rejected as unprofitable. We've been treated like children at the adult table, told to be quiet and grateful for whatever scraps fall our way. Your species is young. You have not earned greater status. Earned how? By waiting another 10,000 years until we're old enough to matter? By the time humanity catches up to your level naturally, the political structures of this galaxy will be so entrenched that we'll never have a real voice. Victor shook his head. I didn't ask for this situation, Chancellor. I was just trying to fix a broken engine. But since I'm here, I'm going to make it count. Morvik's colors shifted through contemplative purples. And if we refuse your demands? If we simply destroy you and hunt for your hidden technology? Then you'll spend the next 4 months searching the entire outer territories for a data cache that might not exist in a form you can detect. And when you fail and the schematics reach Earth, you'll be negotiating with my government instead of with me. I'm a reasonable man, Chancellor. I just want fairness. I can't promise the same from politicians. The Kethrani delegate, an ancient scholar named Fosik, whose compound eyes had seen empires rise and fall, leaned forward with interest. The human makes a compelling argument. Perhaps we should hear his specific terms before dismissing them entirely. Victor nodded gratefully. First, full council membership for Earth. Voting rights on all matters affecting human interests. Second, unrestricted trade access, without the tariffs that currently make our goods non-competitive. Third, removal of settlement restrictions on systems within our designated exploration zone. And fourth, the resonance technology I've developed gets released to everyone. No exclusive control. No licensing fees. Equal access for all species. That last demand is absurd, Theska clicked. You would simply give away the most valuable discovery in millennia? The technology becomes worthless if only one species controls it. The point isn't to make humanity dominant. The point is to level the playing field. If everyone has access to faster travel, then geography stops being the determining factor in galactic politics. Influence has to be earned through cooperation instead of inherited through position. Morvik made a sound that Victor's translator interpreted as grudging respect. You have thought this through carefully, human. I've had a lot of time to think. Your holding cells aren't exactly full of entertainment options. The Chancellor turned to address the assembled delegates. This chamber will recess for private deliberation. The human will be returned to custody pending our decision. No communication with Earth will be permitted until this matter is resolved. As guards approached to escort Victor away, he called out one final statement. Chancellor, I should mention one more thing. The probe heading toward Earth? It has a resonance engine of its own. If any ship gets within scanning range, the probe will detect the approach and jump to a random location. Could be deep space. Could be a star's core. Could be this station's docking bay at relativistic speed. The guards hesitated. I'm a mechanic, Victor continued. I solve problems by understanding how things work. And one thing I understand really well is that machines don't negotiate. They just do what they're built to do. If you want to intercept that probe, you'll have to find it without looking for it. I don't think your technology can manage that. The guards escorted him out in silence. 3 days later, Victor received an unexpected visitor. His quarters in the detention section were small but comfortable, with a window that looked out on the Andromeda Relay's endless stellar display. He was eating synthesized food that tasted like cardboard when the door opened without warning, and a being stepped through that made his translation device emit a painful squeal of feedback. She called herself IV Ra. Her form was humanoid, but wrong, as if reality couldn't quite decide how to render her. She moved without seeming to walk, her shape flowing around the furniture rather than past it. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made Victor's bones ache. You've caused quite a disturbance, mechanic. Victor set down his food. I've been told that a few times lately. Who are you? I am what exists at the edges of your understanding. I am what your ancestors glimpsed in fever dreams and called divine. I am here to warn you. Warn me about what? Ivra settled into a form that was almost human, though her eyes held depths that no biological creature could possess. About what you have actually done. You believe you discovered a more efficient form of space travel. You did not. You discovered a language. A very old language, spoken by beings who existed before the stars. The resonance patterns you created are not engineering. They are words. And something in the darkness has started listening. Victor felt cold settle in his stomach. That's quite a warning. Care to be more specific? The warp drives your galaxy uses were not designed merely for transportation. They were designed as barriers. Controlled punctures through a membrane that separates your reality from what lies beyond. The civilizations that created them understood this. But knowledge fades. Purposes are forgotten. Now beings like you stumble upon truths that were deliberately hidden, and you call it innovation. She reached out and touched his tablet. The screen flickered with equations he had never programmed, symbols that seemed to move and breathe. The Council is deciding whether to accept your demands. They think they are weighing political advantages against economic disruption. They do not understand that the real question is whether your galaxy survives what you have awakened. And what exactly have I awakened? Ivra's form flickered, and for a moment, Victor glimpsed something vast behind her eyes, something patient and ancient and utterly inhuman. The unwritten. The silence between stars. The beings who inhabited this universe before matter existed. They were not enemies of life. They were simply incompatible with it. Your ancestors sealed them away to protect both sides. Your resonance patterns are the key to that seal. Victor stared at the impossible equations on his screen. I didn't know. I was just trying to build a better engine. Intent does not change consequence. You have 4 months before your probe reaches Earth. I suggest you use that time to understand what you have actually created. Because once your species opens that door, there will be no closing it again. She was gone between one heartbeat and the next, leaving only a faint ringing in Victor's ears and a tablet full of mathematics that would take him weeks to decode. He sat alone in the darkness, staring at symbols that seemed to stare back, and wondered if his negotiation had just become something far more dangerous. Victor spent 14 days studying the equations Ivra had left behind. He did not sleep. He barely ate. The patterns were beyond anything in his experience. Mathematics that described not just energy and space, but something deeper, something that touched the foundations of existence itself. Normal physics broke down when he applied standard analysis. The numbers followed rules that had no names in any human textbook. On the 15th day, he understood Dot, and then he did something that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He requested an audience with the council and announced that he was withdrawing all his demands. "I was wrong," he told the assembled delegates, his voice carrying across the crystalline chamber. "The technology I developed is too dangerous to be released. I'm prepared to provide complete technical specifications to the council on the condition that all 3 drives are destroyed, including the one heading to Earth." High Chancellor Morvick studied him with ancient, calculating eyes. "This is quite a reversal, human. 2 weeks ago, you were prepared to hold this galaxy hostage. Now you simply surrender?" "Not surrender. Recognition. I've spent my whole life fixing things that were broken, improving systems that could work better. But some things aren't broken, Chancellor. Some things are exactly as they should be. Changing them would cause harm beyond anything I can imagine." He held up his tablet, displaying the equations Ivra had given him. "The resonance patterns I discovered aren't just a better way to travel. They're a key to regions of subspace that were deliberately sealed off by someone a long time ago. I don't know what's in there, and I don't want to find out." The chamber murmured with confusion. Ambassador Theska clicked her mandibles skeptically. "You expect us to believe that you suddenly developed a conscience, that you would give up leverage that could have elevated your species to galactic prominence. I expect you to verify everything I've told you. Run your own analysis. Consult your archives. And then make your own decision. I'm done trying to leverage this situation. I just want to go home." Morvick was silent for a long moment. "This chamber will recess for investigation. The human will remain in custody until we can verify his claims." The investigation lasted 3 weeks. Engineers from 17 species examined Victor's modifications. Mathematicians ran simulations that pushed computing systems to their limits. Historians searched archives dating back to the galaxy's earliest civilizations, looking for any reference to sealed regions of subspace. What they found disturbed them. The references were scattered across cultures that had no other connection, buried in myths and religious texts that had been dismissed as primitive superstition. But when compiled, they told a consistent story. Before the Foundation races achieved sentience, before stars had settled into tea, our current patterns, something else had existed. Not a species, but a presence. An awareness that operated on principles incompatible with matter, that caused probability to warp and minds to fragment simply through proximity. The first civilizations to develop space travel had encountered it. Most had been destroyed. The survivors had sealed subspace through desperate measures they barely understood, creating barriers that became the foundation of all modern warp technology. The drives that powered galactic civilization were not just engines. They were locks. And Victor Hale had accidentally discovered the key. High Chancellor Morvick summoned Victor to a private chamber. "Your claims are verified," he said. His voice held none of its earlier authority. He sounded old, tired. "The mathematics you provided describe real phenomena. The historical records confirm your warning. We have been building our civilization on foundations we did not understand, and you have revealed how fragile those foundations truly are." Victor sat in a chair too large for his frame, feet dangling slightly above the floor. "So we're good? You destroy the drives, I go home. Everyone forgets this happened?" "Human." Morvick's massive form shifted closer. "You presented this technology as a bargaining chip. You threatened to release it to Earth. You built safeguards to prevent interception. None of those actions suggest a being who would simply surrender when warned of danger. Victor was quiet. You knew we would investigate. You knew what we would find. You wanted us to discover the truth ourselves, because you knew we wouldn't believe it from you. Morvik's bioluminescent markings flickered. What are you actually planning, Victor Hale? Victor looked at the ancient being for a long moment. I needed you to understand the danger before you could understand the opportunity. The Chancellor went very still. The seal your ancestors created isn't a wall. It's a membrane. It was designed to be permeable, to allow controlled interaction between our reality and what lies beyond. But over time, the knowledge of how to use it properly was lost. Everyone just treated it as a barrier because they were afraid. Victor stood, pulling out his tablet. The resonance patterns I created aren't weapons. They're words. A language for communicating with whatever exists on the other side. I spent 2 weeks studying Ivra's equations, and I realized something. The unwritten. The beings your ancestors sealed away, they're not hostile. They're just different. And they've been isolated, alone, for longer than this galaxy has existed. You cannot possibly know that. No, but I can test it. Victor displayed a small device on his screen. Something that looked like a tuning fork made of impossible materials. This is a resonance emitter. Very low power. It can't breach any barriers or do anything dramatic. But it can send a signal. A simple greeting. And if I'm right about what the equations mean, something will respond. Morvik's colors cycled through shades of alarm. You want to contact entities that terrified our ancestors into sealing reality itself? I want to find out if there's an alternative to permanent isolation. Your ancestors were scared. They reacted out of fear. But fear makes bad decisions, Chancellor. It builds walls when it should build bridges. Victor met the ancient being's gaze directly. I'm just a mechanic. I fix things that are broken. And something about this situation feels broken to me. 100,000 years of separation. A universe divided against itself. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe I can figure out how to make it work better. Morvik was silent for a very long time. If you are wrong, he finally said, you could doom every living being in this galaxy. If I'm right, I could change everything for the better. And you believe the potential benefit justifies the risk? Victor thought about his life, about decades spent in engine rooms, fixing problems nobody else wanted to touch, about the way a machine felt when it finally ran the way it was supposed to, smooth and efficient, and alive in a way that matter usually wasn't. I believe some things are worth trying, Chancellor, even when the odds are bad, even when failure means disaster, because the alternative is accepting limits that might not need to exist. Morvik made a decision that would change galactic history. The Council will authorize a controlled experiment. One test, under maximum containment. If anything goes wrong, we will destroy everything you have created, including you. Victor nodded. Fair enough. When do we start? Immediately. Before I regain my senses and realize what I have agreed to. They chose a dead system on the galaxy's outer rim for the experiment. The star had burned out millions of years ago, leaving only a cold white dwarf surrounded by lifeless rocks. A research station was constructed at maximum safe distance, staffed by scientists from 12 species who had been sworn to absolute secrecy. Victor Hale was placed aboard a small ship equipped with sensors powerful enough to detect quantum fluctuations in subspace. He was completely alone. The resonance emitter sat on the console before him, its crystalline structure catching light in ways that made it seem to glow from within. Victor had spent 3 days preparing, running simulations, checking calculations. Everything suggested the experiment should work. Nothing told him what would happen if it did. Activating resonance emitter, he announced to the recording systems. His voice sounded strange in the empty ship. Beginning harmonic sequence Alpha 7. He pressed the activation control. For the first hour, nothing happened. Victor sat in the pilot's chair, watching his instruments, listening to the silence between stars. The emitter pulsed with frequencies that existed at the edge of what matter could produce, sending ripples through subspace that propagated outward at speeds faster than light. No response. For the second hour, Victor began to doubt. Maybe the equations were wrong. Maybe Ivra had been mistaken or had deliberately misled him. Maybe the unwritten were exactly what the ancient records described. Incomprehensible horrors that could only be kept at bay through eternal separation. Then the sensors registered something. It started as a subtle vibration. A harmonic that matched the frequency of his signal almost perfectly. Then it grew, adding layers, building complexity, becoming something that was unmistakably a response, not random, not hostile, just curious. Victor adjusted his emitter, modulating the resonance in patterns that felt more like music than mathematics. He was improvising now, following instincts he could not explain. Responding to the alien presence the way a musician responds to an unexpected partner in a jazz session. The response shifted, adapted, began to mirror his patterns, while adding variations. For 47 minutes, a human mechanic and an entity older than matter engaged in something that historians would struggle to classify. It was not quite conversation. It was not quite art. It was two forms of existence discovering they could recognize each other across a gulf that should have been unbridgeable. When it ended, Victor sat in stunned silence for a long time. Then he opened communications to the research station. Tell the council that the unwritten says hello, and it wants to know why we stopped calling. The reaction was immediate chaos. Within hours, delegates from every major civilization were demanding explanations. The recording of Victor's contact was analyzed, debated, and disputed by experts who could not agree on what it meant. Some saw evidence of genuine communication. Others saw only patterns that humans were misinterpreting through wishful thinking. A few suggested the entire experiment had been fabricated. Chancellor Morvick convened an emergency session of the full council. The human claims to have established contact with entities we sealed away to protect ourselves, he announced. If true, this represents the most significant development in galactic history since the invention of warp travel itself. If false, it represents either delusion or deliberate deception on a massive scale. Ambassador Theska rose immediately. The Volusian Confederacy demands that all research be terminated immediately. We have survived 100,000 years by maintaining the barriers our ancestors created. One human's apparent success does not justify risking everything. Fossick of the Kethrani offered a different perspective. The barriers are degrading. Our engineers have known this for millennia, though the information has been classified at the highest levels. Eventually, they will fail regardless of our intentions. Perhaps it is better to establish communication before that happens, rather than face the unwritten as complete strangers. The debate continued for days. Factions formed. Alliances shifted. And through it all, Victor Hallé waited in the research station, studying the data from his contact and preparing for what he knew was coming. It arrived in the form of a fleet. The Preservers, as they called themselves, were a coalition of species who believed the contact experiment represented an unacceptable risk. Led by the Methylans, beings who processed decisions over geological timeframes but acted decisively once conclusions were reached. They had secretly constructed a weapon based on Victor's own technology. They called it the Final Seal. Where Victor's resonance patterns opened communication, theirs would close it permanently. The device would generate harmonics that destroyed any connection between normal space and the regions where the unwritten existed. The barriers would become impenetrable. Contact would become impossible, and everything Victor had built would be erased. They attacked without warning. The research station's defenses held for 17 minutes before failing. Victor barely reached an escape pod before the main structure was destroyed. As he tumbled through the debris field, watching the final seal charge its systems, he realized that everything he had worked for was about to end. Then the unwritten responded, not with violence, not with destruction, simply with presence. Every sentient being within 100 light years experienced a simultaneous vision. They saw the galaxy not as stars and planets, but as a tapestry of living energy, threads of possibility connecting every conscious mind. And they saw those threads being cut, severed, bleeding light into darkness. Underneath it all, a message resonated through every brain regardless of species. Why do you hurt yourselves? The final seal's activation sequence stopped. The preserver fleet hung motionless in space, crews incapacitated by the overwhelming presence they had just experienced. Victor's escape pod drifted among the debris, its occupants slowly recovering from a vision that had shown him exactly what was at stake. The unwritten were not trying to invade. They were not trying to destroy. They were simply present, aware, curious about the beings on the other side of a barrier they had never asked for, and they were sad about the isolation, sad about the fear, sad about the endless millennia of separation from minds that could almost understand them. Victor opened his communication system. This is Victor Hall to any vessel receiving. The experiment worked. Contact is real, and the unwritten are not what we feared. He took a breath. They're what we could have been if we'd chosen understanding instead of isolation. They're our neighbors, and I think it's time we actually got to know them. The galaxy, for once, was listening. The galaxy changed faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months of Victor Hale's successful contact, the Council of Foundation Races dissolved itself, not through war or revolution, but through a quiet recognition that its purpose had been fulfilled. For 100,000 years, it had maintained barriers, kept peace, ensured that civilization continued. Now the barriers were opening. Peace meant something different when it included beings from beyond conventional reality. Not in its place, a new body emerged. The assembly of all voices gave every sentient species representation, including humanity, including the unwritten themselves, who communicated through harmonic projections. That made the air shimmer with impossible colors. Victor was offered a seat on the assembly's founding council. He declined. I'm a mechanic, he told the delegates, who tried to convince him otherwise. I fix things that are broken. This isn't broken anymore. You don't need me. He returned to work, accepting a position at a repair station in the outer territories, where ships still came in with conventional problems that needed conventional solutions. The galaxy went on without him, navigating the strange new landscape his discovery had created. But the galaxy did not forget. 2 years after first contact, the first hybrid technologies began to emerge. Ships equipped with resonance drives that communicated with subspace instead of forcing through it. Medical systems that drew on the unwritten's understanding of probability to heal conditions once thought incurable. Communication networks that operated across distances that would have been impossible under the old physics. And something else. Something no one had predicted. Children began to be born who could hear the harmonics naturally. Not many at first. Perhaps 1 in a million across all species. But they could perceive the unwritten's presence without technological assistance. They could see the tapestry of existence that Victor had glimpsed only through sensor data. They were the first generation of a new kind of consciousness. Humanity, youngest of the spacefaring species, produced more of these children per capita than any other civilization. It makes sense, Fossick of the Kethrani observed when the statistics became clear. Your species evolved in an environment of constant change. You are genetically primed to adapt, to incorporate new information into your fundamental structure. The unwritten's contact is simply another form of information. Victor was summoned to testify before the assembly about the phenomenon. He arrived in the same gray jumpsuit he had worn to his original trial, grease still embedded in the calluses of his hands. "I don't know why humans are producing more of these children," he admitted. "I'm not a biologist. I'm not a geneticist. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right questions." "Perhaps that is precisely the point," said the harmonic presence that represented the unwritten in the chamber. Its voice resonated through every delegate simultaneously, a chorus of awareness that had learned to translate itself into concepts biological minds could process. "Your species has always asked questions, even when the answers were dangerous. Even when older civilizations warned you to stop. You are a young people, but you are not a cautious people. This is both your weakness and your strength." Victor shrugged. "We grew up on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us. Storms, predators, ice ages. We learned early that standing still meant dying. I guess that lesson stuck. It stuck in ways you do not fully understand." The harmonic presence shifted, and for a moment Victor glimpsed something vast behind its manifestation. "The barriers that separated us were created by fear. Your ancestors did not understand us, and we did not understand them. In that ignorance, destruction seemed inevitable. But understanding does not require similarity. It requires only the willingness to try." "Is that why you responded to my signal? Because I was willing to try?" "We responded because you spoke to us as if we might listen. No being had done that in longer than your universe has existed. You treated us as neighbors rather than threats. This was unusual. This was intriguing. This was worth answering." The assembly sat in contemplative silence. "So what happens now?" Victor asked. "The barriers are opening. Our civilizations are learning to work together. The children being born can perceive both sides of reality. Where does this end? It does not end. That is the point." The harmonic presence seemed almost amused. "Existence is not a problem to be solved. It is a conversation to be continued. You asked if we were hostile. We ask if you are ready. The answer to both questions is the same. We are learning." 5 years after first contact, Victor Halle retired from active work. He bought a small habitat on a quiet moon where the nights were long and the stars shone clear. He spent his days reading, tinkering with old engines, and watching ships pass overhead, carrying beings that had once seemed impossibly alien. He was 64 years old when Ivra visited him for the last time. She appeared in his workshop without warning, as she always had. But her form was different now, more stable, as if she had learned to exist more comfortably in conventional reality. "You changed everything," she said. "You were one human with a broken tablet, and you reshaped the destiny of a galaxy." Victor set down the component he had been cleaning. "I found a pattern that worked. That's all mechanics do. You declared war on limits. That is considerably more. Is that what my story would be called, if someone were telling it?" Ivra smiled. It was the first time her expression had seemed genuinely warm. "Something like that. They asked Human to fix one warp drive. He built 3 and declared war on limits. It has a certain ring to it." Victor laughed. "Sounds a bit dramatic. The universe tends toward drama when viewed from sufficient distance. You were asked to repair a single engine. Instead, you discovered a language, established contact with beings older than matter, and fundamentally altered the relationship between 2 forms of existence that had been separated for eternity. What would you call it?" He thought about it, about the terrified mechanic who had stood before the council, about the impossible gambles, about the moment when something vast and ancient had responded to his greeting with simple curiosity. I'd call it getting lucky, and being too stubborn to quit when reasonable people would have given up. Ivra laughed. Then perhaps that is what all wars against limits require. Luck, stubbornness, and the wisdom to know when you've won. She began to fade. Wait, Victor said. You never told me. What are you, really? Not the unwritten. Something else. Ivra's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I am what exists at the boundary between what is and what could be. I am the voice that whispers to those brave enough to listen. I am the limit that waits to be exceeded. And I am grateful, Victor Hawley. Because of you, I am no longer alone. She was gone. Victor sat in his workshop, surrounded by tools and components, and the soft hum of machinery that had been his whole life. Outside, ships passed overhead, their resonance engines singing with frequencies that connected two forms of existence. He picked up his wrench and went back to work, because that was what mechanics did. They fixed things. They made them better. They refused to accept that anything was beyond repair. And somewhere in the vast spaces between stars, something ancient listened to the universe's machinery running smoother than it ever had before, and felt what might have been joy. The war against limits had no final victory. It was not that kind of war, but it was a war worth fighting. And Victor Hala, human mechanic, had fired the first shot.